The food pyramid. Could this colorful polygon tell us everything we need to know? Its stripes showcase grains, veggies, fruits, dairy, meat, and beans, the 5 food groups stamped healthy by the US Department of Agriculture. It was the USDA's attempt during the 90s and 2000s to inspire people to eat well, particularly in the face of a growing epidemic of diet-related health problems. As a kid, it worked for me. Buried deep in my subliminal memories is a lone pyramid plastered on a school cafeteria wall. So is this silly flash game version. And apparently some kids were blessed by a visit from the pyramid himself. So what lurks beneath the facade of this cheerful little pyramid? A twisted web of controversy. Its threads are far-reaching. Questionable nutrition science, messy corporate lobbying, and ultimately, a failure to teach Americans the intimate ties between food and health. To start untangling this web, let's go all the way back to World War II. During the war, food was scarce. People simply weren't getting enough calories or nutrients. Scurvy, rickets, goiter, these rare diseases were common back then. So, the USDA launched the Basic 4 campaign to encourage veggies, milk, meat, and cereal consumption to the public. Eat more, eat fresh. However, the late 20th century saw the rise of an entirely different beast, eating far too much of the wrong food. Rising rates of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes was a devastating consequence. This issue is vastly more complex than the underfeeding epidemic of World War II. Firstly, what constitutes wrong food? And how do we know with certainty that these foods are directly responsible for the diseases killing Americans? Think about the popular diets of today. They span the entire spectrum, from vegetarianism to strict carnivores. How exactly do the US government figure out which one is correct and proceed to slap it on a triangle? It's the job of the US Office of the Surgeon General, aka the nation's doctor, to sort out these kinds of medical complexities. The very first Surgeon General's report on nutrition and health was released in 1988 with a strong claim. The major concern for Americans is the disproportionate consumption of foods high in fats. Clearly, this is where the low-fat fad was born. So, what's the evidence for this claim? Shockingly, I found that only 14 of the 727 pages of the report actually cite scientific studies about the relationship between dietary fat intake and clinical outcomes of heart disease, which was the most worrisome disease at the time due to its high mortality. Dig deeper into those 14 pages, and you'll find a plethora of issues. Firstly, a majority of the studies cited are only associations instead of experiments. Why is that an issue? Let's take one of those studies in the report, the Ireland-Boston study. Among other aims, it was examining the relationship between saturated fat intake and death from coronary heart disease in a group of 1,508 men. The researchers found that the more saturated fat intake a person reported, the higher their risk of dying from heart disease. Great, we figured out heart disease, right? In reality, there is danger in equating correlation and causation. In the Ireland-Boston study, the researchers did not control for calorie intake since it is not a predictor of mortality from coronary heart disease. Given what we know today about excess calorie intake and its relationship with metabolic syndrome and related diseases, I have to disagree with the researchers' premise. Furthermore, how do we really know how much saturated fat each of the 1,508 men ate? Did we track every mouthful for decades? And how do we know that there isn't some other molecule often found in fatty foods, say sugar, that was the real culprit? That's the issue with relying on studies showing associations. There can be dozens of factors beyond what is measured that better explains the outcomes. Experimental studies, on the other hand, can actually measure cause and effect. There were several cited in the Surgeon General's report. However, several of them also only had 10 to 20 people enrolled. That is not enough to base an entire nation's dietary recommendations. It's obvious that the 1988 Surgeon General's report was biased by the science popular at the time. That being said, the studies shouldn't be discounted. There is far more that we should explore scientifically about the metabolism of dietary fat and how it affects disease outcomes. However, the evidence cited simply wasn't strong enough to warrant cutting a major food group from Americans' diets. Unfortunately, this report was the scientific foundation of the USDA's food pyramid of 1991. First showcased by the Washington Post on April 13th, the pyramid depicted a hierarchy of 5 food groups. Bread and grains made the foundation, followed by fruits and veggies, then meat and dairy, and finally fat and oil at the very peak. The meat and dairy industry was outraged. Revisiting the basic 4, it's clear that meat and dairy were a cornerstone of the American diet. Now, the pyramid suggested people limit their intake in favor of breads and produce. Meat and dairy were relegated to nutritional purgatory next to fats and sweets. "We're not happy with the way we look," stated a National Milk Producers Federation lobbyist in response to the pyramid campaign. The cattlemen felt the same. The pyramid puts their products in an unfair light. Merely 2 weeks after the pyramid's release, it was retracted. 1 year and $855,000 later, it was republished. The USDA claims the revisions were made because the pyramid was confusing to children. However, the changes made don't simplify the pyramid. Instead, the name changed from Eating Right to Food Guide, and it boosted the recommended meat serving from 4 to 6 ounces to 5 to 7 ounces. It certainly appears like a fold to the industry. Marion Nestle's Food Lobbies, the Food Pyramid, and U.S. Nutrition Policy beautifully analyzes a glaring issue the pyramid controversy raises. Why is the U.S. Department of Agriculture, a governmental agency responsible for protecting the interests of those in agriculture, delivering nutrition advice to the American public? Don't get me wrong, I have an incredible respect for the farmers and cattlemen keeping our country fed. Their interests should be protected. Yet, we should also have appropriate checks and balances to ensure mass nutritional recommendations aren't made under the pressure of agricultural economics. At the end of the day, nutrition science is infuriatingly difficult. It's hard to test exactly how what we eat affects our bodies. I believe that on the whole, the USDA, the U.S. agricultural industry, and the scientists cited in the Surgeon General's report are all truly trying to keep Americans fed and healthy. But the blunder of the low-fat diet guidelines raises awareness that we should be careful in evaluating the science behind nutrition. If left unchecked, food politics can be rife with corporate interest and popular consensus instead of rigorous methodology. That's it for now. Thanks for stopping by today and listening to the story of the USDA food pyramid. Subscribe to learn more about the history, economics, and science of food.